Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are embarking on a really profound journey. We're going to be looking into the core of what causes so much psychological suffering and, more importantly, the spiritual remedies we can actually use.
Yeah, this is a topic that really sits at a crossroads. It's part deep spiritual philosophy, but it's also about, practical day-to-day energy management.
Absolutely. And this deep dive was specifically requested by Sachin J. Karnik, who is the founder and CEO of Energy and Personal Excellence, LLC.
And our source material for today is very, very focused. It comes from an audio recording called What is Self-Pity and Truly Discovering Joy in Life.
Right, and that recording was part of the religious studies arm of the Energy and Personal Excellence LLC program. It was created by Sachin Karnik and actually delivered on Thanksgiving Day 2025.
And we should also mention, it's important to note, Sachin Karnik conducts daily satsang online. All are welcome to join.
So our mission today is really to give you, the listener, a kind of shortcut to the wisdom in these teachings.
Yeah, we need to go beyond just the surface definitions and really unpack the core mechanisms here. We're talking about the destructive nature of self-pity, the mechanics of the ego, which is known as ahamkar.
All the way through to the spiritual path toward finding that genuine foundational joy, the joy known as Ananda.
And how to get there through surrender and, conscious action.
We're definitely not just looking for fleeting happiness here. Our goal is to give you clear, actionable insight into recognizing and hopefully dismantling what the source material calls a kind of mental self-imprisonment.
It's a powerful phrase. It's about moving from being a victim of your own memory loops to becoming an active agent of joy right here in the present moment.
Exactly. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with what feels like the most insidious drain on our personal energy, and that's self-pity.
Right.
The source material, it doesn't just treat this as some, temporary bout of sadness. It's presented as something far more serious.
It's framed as a systemic destroyer of potential. It's not just a bad mood.
So how does the recording first define self-pity, and why is that definition so critical to everything else we're going to talk about?
Well, the definition itself is surprisingly simple. And that's what's so devastating about it.
Okay.
Self-pity is just the feeling of sadness about situations that have already happened in your life. But the key piece, the really crucial part, is the energetic cost.
The cost.
Yes. It is described as a highly energy-draining emotion. It's not just that it feels uncomfortable. It's an emotional pattern that systematically starves you of the very power you need to change your circumstances.
And the source is very specific about what gets starved.
Right.
It points to the destruction of three core capacities, these three Shaktis.
Powers that make everything possible, really.
Right. So let's spend some time defining these, because I think this is where the real damage becomes so clear.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Self-pity is like a triple threat to our fundamental energies.
So what's the first one?
First, it destroys non-Shakti. This is the power of knowledge, of wisdom, or cognition.
How does that work?
Well, when you're steeped in self-pity, your entire cognitive bandwidth is just. It's occupied. It's taken up by this internal drama. You can't see reality clearly.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you make a mistake at work. If you spend the next week thinking, how could I be so stupid, or why does this always happen to me? Your mind is just looping.
Right.
It can't look at the mistake objectively, analyze the variables, learn the lesson, and then move on.
Yeah.
The looping itself actively blocks the path to gaining any new knowledge or insight.
So the very act of self-pity creates a kind of cognitive bias that literally prevents us from learning from the exact situations we're obsessing over. It almost guarantees we'll repeat the mistakes.
Precisely. And that leads to the next one. It also destroys Kriya Shakti.
Which is the power of action.
The power of action, or the ability to execute. Think about it. If your mental energy reserves are at zero because they're all being siphoned into ruminating on old wounds or injustices, what do you have left for constructive action?
Nothing. You feel paralyzed.
Exactly. People trapped in self-pity often say they feel paralyzed, that they can't even start simple tasks. That's the Kriya Shakti being drained away. The mind is just saying, why even bother? Nothing ever works out for me anyway.
And then the third one, the loss of Ika Shakti. This one sounds like it might be the deepest drain of all.
It is. It really is the foundation. Ika Shakti is the power of will, of desire, of motivation itself.
So it's not just that action is hard.
It's that self-pity saps the very drive to even want things to get better. When your mind is convinced that life is fundamentally unfair or that you're fundamentally flawed, the motivation to even engage with the world just dies better. it disappears.
And that would lead directly to withdrawal, stagnation.
And a deepening sense of meaninglessness, which of course just fuels more self-pity. It's a classic vicious cycle.
So self-pity is this self-imposed shutdown, and it's built on a steady diet of very specific thoughts. Things like life is unfair or I've been treated so unfairly.
Or thoughts about your own perceived shortcomings. I shouldn't have said that. Or that intense internal critic screaming, how terrible I am.
And these thoughts, they aren't just symptoms of the problem.
No, they're the active agents of destruction. They're the engine.
And what is that engine called in the source?
The engine driving this entire destructive process is the ahamkar.
Okay, a ahamkar. Now, this is a term that people might have heard, but it often gets sort of loosely translated as arrogance in the West. The source material seems to offer a much more nuanced view.
It does, and we need to clarify that distinction.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the Atman here, which is the true soul or the universal self.
Right. This is specifically the mechanism that generates self-pity, blame, and guilt.
Exactly. Ahamkar is the individualized self. It's that sense of I-ness that we all need to function in the world. And the source is clear. You need a certain amount of ahamkar for Vyavakarika for worldly transactions.
So you need it to do the laundry or make a phone call.
You couldn't function without it. But the problem starts when this ahamkar takes over the steering wheel and generates its core destructive activity, which the source calls self-referential looping.
Self-referential looping, that sounds like the key term for you to grasp because it's what defines this mental prison. What does that internal process actually feel like? What is the texture of that loop?
It's a repetitive mental process. Your attention just continuously cycles back to me, the ego, the individualized self. It's a nonstop feedback mechanism that is focused entirely inward on my wounds, my scars, my injustice.
It sounds like a record needle stuck in a groove. The mind just goes back to the point of injury again and again and again.
That's a perfect analogy. So instead of the mind working as a tool to engage with the outside world, to solve problems, to connect with people, to get a bigger perspective, it becomes completely absorbed in its own story of suffering.
A psychological black hole?
Yes. The individual is literally drowned inside these emotions. The source describes this as the person generating a psychological prison through the very acts of self-pity, blame, and guilt. This isn't an external jail cell. It's a voluntary internal enclosure.
But that's the great paradox, isn't it? If suffering is so painful, why does the ego create this prison and then just stay there? What's the payoff?
It's a very subtle and tricky phenomena, as the source puts it. The payoff is a kind of twisted comfort, a twisted stability.
How so?
Suffering, when you can control it and contain it within a familiar story, it gives the ego an identity. As long as the ego can keep telling the story, this shouldn't have happened to me, or look how much I have endured, it stays relevant. It stays at the center of the universe.
Wow. So the ego would rather be the central suffering victim in a small known cage than face the terrifying uncertainty of liberation and, well, non-identity outside that loop.
That's the psychological trap in a nutshell. The focus always remains on these consciously, repeatedly rehearsed themes about me and my suffering.
And that mechanism, it stops the mind from ever seeking a real solution.
It leads to stagnation and degradation. It prevents the mind from ever asking the useful, liberating question, what can be done to better myself? Or even, what else is true besides what I'm thinking right now?
It just snaps back to,
Look at how bad this is for me. And this is why, spiritual practice, Pajan's mantra, Satsang, is so critical. They are the daily drilling you need to unblock this energy drain from the system because the ego's repetitive gravity is just immense.
So if the ego is the engine and repetition is the fuel, what makes it all stick? How does a passing sadness turn into a chronic, self-imposed identity?
It's the inertia. Looping doesn't just stay temporary. It actually solidifies the state of suffering. The frequency of the repetition, that constant return to the wound, is what gives it a sense of permanence.
So a normal episodic mood, which, life is full of, gets transformed into a solidified, ongoing state inside the person.
Precisely. The repeated focus stabilizes the self-pity. And psychologically, the source defines this chronic attachment to the story of suffering as narrative fixation.
Narrative fixation. That implies you can't let the story evolve. It's a rigid, repetitive attachment to a single script about yourself and your past.
Yes, past life events, divorces, financial mistakes, conflicts from 10 years ago. It's always replayed through the exact same filter of guilt, shame, and blame.
And this fixation, it's tied to another term you mentioned, rumination.
Intrinsically tied. A lot of people think they're being productive when they ruminate. They think they're analyzing the consequences or asking, why does this always happen to me? They feel like they're trying to solve it.
But the source makes a clear distinction between that and actual problem solving. So if analysis is usually helpful, why does rumination just make you sink deeper?
Because rumination is defined as repetitive, passive thinking about your distress. The goal isn't forward action. It's an attempt to mentally outrun the pain by analyzing it over and over. But the analysis itself just keeps the pain fresh and immediate.
It's like trying to put out a fire by throwing more fuel on it.
It's a great way to put it. Instead of asking, okay, what can I do now to create a better future? The mind just returns to, look at how bad this is for me. And that looping analysis is the glue. It's what stabilizes the self-pity into a fixed narrative.
Okay, so to break free from this narrative fixation, you need a pretty fundamental shift in how you see things. And the source offers a really radical perspective on time itself. It says, emphatically, that the past doesn't actually exist.
This is a challenging one. It's a deep philosophical and spiritual truth. We live our lives organized by time, but the source forces us to confront that the past, as a place and time you can go back to and change, it's gone.
It asks the question, are we really living in the past?
Or are we living in the memory structure of those past events, but we're doing it in the present?
Okay, I think this is a point where we should push back a little for the listener's sake, because that can sound very confusing. Are we saying historical facts aren't real? Or is this purely a psychological and energetic concept?
That's a necessary clarification. The external historical events are fixed. The facts are the facts. But the past, as a dimension of reality you can inhabit, it's inaccessible. The only reality is the present moment.
So we are not living in the past.
No. We are living in the memory structure of those past events, and we are accessing and processing that structure right now in the present moment. The memories are present now. The future is just a projection of the mind, also happening now.
I see. So if I'm obsessing over a mistake from 5 years ago, I'm not being victimized by history. I am actively performing an act of self-contamination right now by choosing to run that memory loop.
That is the severe implication the source emphasizes. By getting trapped and repeating these loops inside that memory structure, we are actively damaging and contaminating the present moment. We're generating our own internal damage.
Yeah.
It affects our mind quality, our energetic body, our ability to interact with reality. This is our self-imprisonment.
That completely shifts the responsibility. It moves you away from fatalism, my past defines me, to a place of personal agency. I am defining my present by choosing to replay this contaminated memory.
Exactly. The Upanishads, Bhagavan Krishna, as the source references them, they teach this principle. We are the cause of our own imprisonment. We have to recognize that the entire storehouse of memories, that sequence we call the past, it's useful data for living, but it is not who we are.
And getting stuck in analyzing that memory structure is what stops us from seeing what's right in front of us.
Yes, and this spiritual truth highlights why those practices we mentioned, the bhajans, mantras, pujan, are so necessary. They serve as anchors. They disrupt the ego's ability to use the present moment for self-contamination by fixing your consciousness on the divine, on the now.
They pull you out of that self-referential loop.
They do, and the constant drilling is required because the pull of that past narrative is so strong. Without a continuous daily effort, the ghosts of the past, which are held in the memory structure, will continue to imprison us in the present.
So the core takeaway is simple. You are actively damaging yourself now by reliving the past now.
That's it.
So if the problem is this self-referential looping, this active contamination of the present moment, we need a solution that goes way beyond just analysis. And the source advocates for what it calls the one-step solution.
That one-step solution is Sharanagati, surrender.
Okay.
This means the immediate and complete surrendering of the ahamkar, specifically the ego that's tied to self-pity, shame, and blame at the feet of Paramatma, or Bhagwan, God. It's the act of turning over that entire toxic mental burden to the divine.
Sharanagati. It's a huge concept in many traditions, taking complete shelter of God. But how is it defined here, practically, as a tool for getting out of the ego's prison? What are the practical aspects of this surrender?
Well, for a true deep dive, we really have to break down the 6 aspects of Sharanagati, because they are the practical framework for this internal turnover.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first is acceptance of favorable circumstances. It's a resolve to accept everything that supports your spiritual path, even if it seems hard at first.
So leaning into what helps you grow.
Exactly. The second is the opposite. Rejection of unfavorable circumstances. A firm rejection of anything that hinders you or drags you back into those loops of ego and self-pity.
Which means consciously removing yourself from toxic environments or relationships.
Yes. Third is the conviction that God will protect. This requires tremendous confidence. You have to believe deeply that the divine will take care of you once you've made that commitment.
That's a huge leap of faith.
It is. The fourth is accepting God as maintainer, recognizing that God is the sole maintainer of your life, not your flawed ego. You let go of that false sense of control that fuels all the self-pity.
Number 5.
Giving up the self. This is the literal act of turnover. You declare, I am yours. I am completely yours. You hand over the whole mind-body complex, flaws and all, with no reservations.
And the last one.
Feeling humble, or karpanya, a deep recognition of your own limitations. And this is not the fake humility of self-blame, which is still the ego talking, but a genuine acceptance of imperfection, realizing only the divine can perfect the process.
That detailed breakdown makes it so clear. Sharanagati is not a passive wish. It's an active spiritual technology that takes immense commitment and courage.
Which is precisely why the ego resists it so fiercely. The ego wants to stay in its self-enclosure because that gives it an identity. It gives it control over that inward flow of energy.
Surrender means turning over those energy vampires that are consuming the Shaktis.
Yes, and the ego's resistance is really the fear of non-identity. The source warns that the ego must be kept strictly at the vyavaharika level, the worldly level, a tool for interaction and nothing more.
Okay, so surrender handles the core attachment. But what about the immediate, very human reaction of guilt and shame when you make a mistake? If we're told not to ruminate or blame ourselves, how do we constructively process remorse?
That's where the source offers prayachipta,
Which means
atonement, or penance. This is the constructive path forward. Instead of sinking into self-pity or self-analysis, which just reactivates the ego's loop, you channel that negative fixation into a positive, purifying action. It's a spiritual structure for handling the fact that, yes, you screwed up.
let's get into the concrete practices for this atonement, because this sounds highly actionable.
The process is laid out very clearly. First, you recognize the mistake was made. And second, you commit to not making that mistake again. That commitment is the real spiritual learning.
Okay, what comes next?
Then you perform a specific action. You transform that internal pressure into external focused energy. The source suggests going to any Hindu temple or any place of worship that feels sacred to you and performing 108 clockwise pradakshina.
Pradakshina, that's circumambulations, right?
Yeah.
A purposeful movement around a sacred center.
It's a profound spiritual exercise. You walk around the deity or the sacred space, always keeping the sacred object on your right side. It represents acknowledging that the divine is the center of your existence.
Doing it 108 times.
That physical act, accompanied by prayer and offering flowers, requires focused energy and a real physical commitment. It channels the turbulent energy of guilt away from that internal loop and directs it into service and devotion.
So the energy that would normally be spent on self-laceration gets channeled into a structured, physical, spiritual act of commitment and purification?
Exactly. But here's the most critical step: the release. Once the atonement is done, the guilt, the shame, the blame, it must be released and not reactivated. It served its purpose. You made the commitment, you did the action, and now you have to consciously drop the self-tension. We are all flawed. Recognizing the flaw is humility. Continuing the suffering is ego.
This brings us to a really key critique the source makes about purely analytical approaches. It says that continuous analysis, like in traditional therapy, is helpful for self-understanding, but often fails to remove the emotion from the root.
Right. The spiritual perspective here is that analyzing the trash doesn't actually remove the trash. It just keeps you engaged with it. You can talk forever about why the ahamkar generated self-pity, but that intellectual discussion rarely cuts the emotion off at its source. To truly remove it from the root, the ahamkar associated with the pain has to be surrendered to Paramatma.
It's the difference between studying the wiring diagram of the psychological prison versus just using the master key to open the door.
That's an excellent analogy. The source quotes Dr. Chetnagopalu's term for these emotions, energy vampires. And that image sticks because they actively destroy your energy, your mind quality, your brain function. If analysis only feeds their relevance, the spiritual path suggests a more forceful method,
Which is?
burning them out of the system through divine attention.
And the source specifically recommends chanting OMA for this. How can a sound vibration do what analysis can't?
Oma is an invocation to destroy limitations. When you focus intensely on a powerful mantra, you are forcing your mind, which is an energy system, to resonate at a new, higher frequency.
Yeah.
This divine resonance acts like a purifying fire. It literally burns away the destructive, low-frequency loops of self-pity and ego. The mantra is a tool for immediate disengagement from the energy vampire, demanding your attention be fixed on the divine sound, not the internal loop.
So once the ego's prison is dismantled through surrender and atonement, the focus shifts. It moves to what we're building in its place.
Right, which is genuine, sustainable joy. And the Source draws a fundamental philosophical line here between two different kinds of happiness, sukha versus ananda.
This distinction feels absolutely critical for modern life, where we're constantly confusing pleasure with lasting fulfillment. So what is the defining characteristic of sukha?
Sukha is enjoyment or pleasure that arises when the divine source, Paramatma, is forgotten.
Forgotten.
Yes. And because the divine source is forgotten, the ego immediately steps in to claim ownership of the experience. We attach the I, me, this, that to it. I like this, I don't like that, I need more of this.
And that introduces desire, which leads to attachment.
And when the pleasure inevitably fades, suffering returns, and the looping begins all over again.
Can you give us some rich, modern examples of mistaking sukha for ananda? Because I think we do it all the time.
All the time. Getting a big promotion or a new job title, that provides sukha. There's a temporary rush of pleasure and validation. But because Paramatma is often forgotten in that moment, the ego says, I earned this. I'm defined by this title.
And as soon as the next challenge comes up, or the validation wears off?
The attachment brings pain. A fleeting romantic experience, buying a new car. These provide intense sukha, but they lack that enduring foundational recognition of the source.
So ananda is the deep, eternal joy that we're actually striving for. How is it defined differently?
Ananda is actual beauty, or eternal joy, that happens when the divine source is recognized and included in the experience. The difference is just an internal reframing.
So if you're enjoying a beautiful sunrise, that's sukha.
Right. But if you consciously add the name of God to that enjoyment, recognizing that your capacity to appreciate it and the source of the beauty itself is Bhagwan, that transforms the experience into Ananda. You still enjoy the beauty, but the enjoyment itself connects you to the eternal source, and that prevents the ego from attaching to it.
So it's not about changing the external thing, the sunrise or the hot chocolate. It's about changing your internal relationship to it. It's an act of spiritual acknowledgement that stops the ego from claiming ownership.
Precisely. If we forget Paramatma, we get Sukha, which is transient and creates attachment. If we remember, we get Ananda, which is eternal and expansive.
This source also links this idea of joy and expansion to the necessity of creativity. It references a statement attributed to Bhagwan Krishna. I, among all the devatas, I am Kamdev.
Yes, Kamdev is the creative impulse, and this is a profound statement about the nature of the divine itself being expressed through creation. The source emphasizes that if we're not being creative, whether that's through art or finding new ways to grow or even just generating newness in our daily routines, we will stagnate.
And stagnation is what leads right back to the self-destructive contraction of self-pity.
It does. Creativity is the continuous force that pulls us forward, and it counters the ego's desire to just keep repeating the past.
This expansion into joy and creativity then leads to some very practical advice on living. It moves beyond a general art of living to the specific art of enjoyment and the art of Sundara, which is beauty.
Yes, and this is where the spiritual teaching really enters the home. Sundara is the cultivation of beauty, and the source insists this has to start at the sensory and bodily level. The advice is to manage your external environment as a direct feedback mechanism for your internal state.
The explicit goal is to make your home a heaven. So what are the practical steps given to cultivate Sundara in our environment?
It's all about intentional organization and appreciation. First, external organization. This is paramount. Organizing your closets, your kitchen, every physical space properly. Disorder is a direct reflection of a chaotic, undisciplined mind, and it consumes subtle energy. Physical nourishment. Making sure there's plenty of good food available, avoiding a feeling of deficiency. This speaks to the need for abundant energy and resources to move beyond a contracting mindset of scarcity.
Okay.
And sensory input. Wearing nice clothes, using nice scents, and just generally making the senses more alive. This isn't about indulgence. It's about honoring the human form and the sensory gateways through which we experience Ananda.
And then mindful action.
Yes. Taking joy and making every mundane action beautiful, washing dishes, vacuuming, doing laundry, these are all opportunities to practice karma yoga and non-attachment. You turn an obligation into an opportunity for presence.
That completely reframes mundane chores. They stop being drains and become spiritual exercises in cultivating beauty and order. And this external order links directly back to internal discipline.
Yes, the source emphasizes the crucial role of discipline. Discipline is the required structure you need to train the animal mind, that part of us that seeks immediate gratification and comfort, which just leads to stagnation.
Can you expand on the evolution that the source suggests?
The human consciousness has to evolve through stages, from the animal mind to human, to bhakta, a devotee, and finally to mukta, a liberated soul. The animal mind requires training, doing things properly, on time, without delay, which is what organization and Sundara provide.
So without that discipline,
The mind gets thrown any which way, just like disorganized clothes in a closet, making it easy prey for the ego's self-pity loops. Making your home heavenly is a necessary, tangible step toward making your mind heavenly.
and this commitment to discipline and external beauty leads to a really profound philosophical equation in the source. It links internal beauty, external suffering, and the highest form of love.
Yes. Sundara plus Karuna, Pri.
This is a deep one. Let's break down the elements. We know Sundara is beauty and order. What is Karuna?
Karuna is compassion for others who are suffering. It's the acknowledgement of the pain and imperfection that are inherent in the material world, in Maya.
And when you combine the appreciation of beauty, Sundara, with the acknowledgement of suffering, Karuna, the result is Pri, or divine love. How does that synthesis happen?
Love, or Pri, emerges as the spontaneous and correct response that bridges these two poles. If you're only focused on Sundara, on beauty, you can become detached, self-absorbed, or just an aesthete.
And if you're only focused on Karuna, on suffering,
You can become overwhelmed, despairing, and sink into a kind of vicarious self-pity. The equation suggests that the ultimate form of love is recognizing that the beauty you perceive, both inside your own energetic system and out in the world, is the manifestation of the divine, of Mahashakti.
and at the same time understanding that all beings are suffering in Maya.
Yes. And the correct response to both of these truths at once is pre-undifferentiated divine love that engages with the world without getting entangled in it.
So this means our inner energetic system has to be clean and beautiful first. The ego, by its very contracted nature, destroys this inner Sundara.
Which is why we have to continually resonate with joy, beauty, and good qualities. When the ego is dominant, the capacity for Sundara is lost, and so true can't emerge. The practical application is to choose beauty, choose order, choose discipline, and through those positive resonances, you create the stable foundation for compassion to lead to divine love.
We've moved from the structure of the prison to the structure of liberation. Now we need to focus on the moment-to-moment spiritual practice that's required to maintain this state. And that starts with the principle of resonance.
The source heavily emphasizes a teaching from Sri Krishna in the Gita. The mind, or your inner space, will be colored by and take the form of whatever it is associated with. It's like a law of spiritual physics.
Right. The ultimate lesson of self-pity is that by associating with that negative memory loop, we become the suffering. So the inverse must also be true.
Absolutely. And this means you have to consciously tune yourself out of the egotistical resonance, the shame, the blame, the guilt, and tune into the divine frequency, or tattva.
This is called divya bha, or divya buddhi.
Yes, the extraordinary quality of undifferentiated love and divine intellect.
So we're constantly being asked, what frequency are you choosing to be on right now? And the positive habits listed in the source are essentially just mechanisms for frequency tuning.
They are active choices of resonance. We have to consciously choose to associate with joy, enjoyment, finding the good qualities in other people, maintaining healthy habits, upholding discipline, and the wise use of our time, money, and energy.
If we consistently resonate with those qualities, we become them.
We do. And if we allow the jungle of toxic reactions, pity, and blame to enter our minds, that contamination colors our inner space and degrades our consciousness. Tuning into Krishna's frequency, as the Gita suggests, is the process of choosing divya buddhi over the ego's contraction.
And to maintain this resonance, the source insists on physical and mental action. The mind has to be active, otherwise it becomes stagnant and contracted.
If the mind isn't given activity, it becomes enclosed and static. The source actually describes it as becoming like a ghost. The body has to move. We need to actively seek out parks, temples, places of beauty. This movement is the antithesis of the energy damage caused by self-pity and mental contraction.
And this action needs to be done with the right perspective about our role in the world, which addresses the ego's tendency to feel overly important. This is where the concept of nimit or instrument comes in.
Yes. The source says we have to drop the enormous tension of feeling indispensable. We are not the ones upholding this sansar, this world cycle. Bhagwan Krishna is holding everything together. We are merely
If
instruments.
Sansara will go on without us.
Recognizing that is a profound relief. It liberates you from so much self-imposed pressure.
This brings us back to a point that needs some deep clarification. If we aren't indispensable, and we aren't here to fix the world, what is the purpose of life, according to the source? And why does it say that the world's problems are inherently unsolvable because the world is in Maya?
This is high-level Vedantic thought. Maya is the illusory, shifting, transient nature of material reality. It's characterized by dualities, joy and sorrow, birth and death. Because the world is fundamentally characterized by this duality and impermanence, problems are built into its very structure.
So you solve one problem and another one just pops up.
Always. Because the world is a constant cycle of transformation, not a solvable math equation.
Yeah.
So our purpose is not to fix the cosmic structure of Maya, a task that will crush any individual, but to serve the world for our own development.
Our own development.
We help others, we give guidance, we show compassion or karuna, but we must not internalize the deficiencies or problems of others or take responsibility for solving 10 people's difficulties. That's the ego trying to be the hero, and it always results in being crushed. Our service is a tool for our spiritual refinement, not a means of perfecting the imperfectible samsar.
This mandate for self-development and service, but without ownership, it leads us directly to the art of remaining free and the art and science of non-entanglement. This sounds like the practical roadmap for maintaining Ananda in a world defined by Maya.
Non-entanglement is essential. You cannot find Ananda, which is beyond the sansar, by just running faster and looping within the confines of Maya. The psychological prison problem can't be solved by improving the prison furniture. You have to go outside the dimension of Prakriti, of material nature, through the door of Sharanagati.
So what does this non-entanglement look like in our daily interactions, especially with family, where the deepest entanglements usually happen?
It requires setting clear limits. The source stresses the need for boundaries in our interactions to avoid too much unnecessary or useless conversation, which generates trouble.
Useless conversation, BM.
Conversation that just generates negativity, gossip, blame, or fear. You need to be intentional about the quality of your conversations. Interaction should focus exclusively on love, affection, truth, care, and compassion, and only address things of immediate beneficial action.
So if a conversation dips into that negative loop of blame or self-pity, we have to disengage or steer it back toward a higher resonance.
That's how you protect your energy from being siphoned by others' negative loops, which is just as important as protecting it from your own ego.
The home environment has to be made heavenly in every way.
In every way. And the core rule is to never engage in negative words, negative thinking, or negative language about others, even family members.
Why is that absolute prohibition on negative language and thoughts so crucial?
It goes right back to the principle of resonance.
Right.
Everybody has deficiencies. That's the nature of Maya. But when you speak negatively about someone else, it causes a destructive vibrational wave that ripples through the environment and immediately contaminates your own inner space.
So a single negative thought about a colleague or a family member immediately tunes your whole environment to a destructive, egotistical frequency.
And it undoes all the work you've done to cultivate Sundara and Ananda. We have to commit to making our home and our mind a living heaven through conscious, positive resonance.
And finally, we come full circle, back to self-pity. The source offers one last, really striking realization about self-blame that ties all of these concepts together.
The ultimate realization is this. Blaming yourself is not an act of humility, as we so often believe. It is an act of ego.
Wow.
It only serves to damage you and trap you further inside that loop. The ego loves being the central character, whether it's as the perfect person or the ultimate sinner. True humility is the immediate realization of your flaw and the immediate surrender of that flaw at the feet of Paramatma.
So the moment you start blaming yourself, you are actively choosing the ego's prison over the path of Sharanagati and Ananda. That is the final test of conscious intention.
It is the decision between self-referential looping and the freedom of divine resonance.
This has been an incredibly deep and comprehensive journey. We've moved from the microscopic mechanism of the ahamkar and its memory loops all the way to the cosmic equation of divine love, of Pri.
Yeah. We've established that self-pity is an active form of self-contamination, and it destroys our core powers, Nan, Kriya, and Ikashakti.
And we learned that the solution isn't more analysis that just feeds the loop, but active spiritual discipline, full surrender, or sharanagati.
Constructive atonement, prayashita. Cultivating beauty in order, sundara. And constantly choosing our resonance toward that eternal joy, ananda. We have to remember we are instruments, nimit, serving the world for our own spiritual development and protecting our inner space from entanglement.
So our final provocative thought for you to carry forward builds on that concept of memory structure versus present reality. If the past doesn't actually exist outside of the memory structure that you are actively holding right now, how much of your perceived identity, the me that suffers, the me that blames, is truly me, and how much is just a mental habit you're choosing to maintain today?
What would happen if you treated those memories merely as data points for learning, rather than as emotional anchors demanding constant attention? That is the daily question of liberation.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
For more information, please contact Sachin J. Karnik at the email address provided in the description box. We'll see you next time.